Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another season of special events here at the Muscarelle Museum. This is the last season for us to be in this building as it currently exists, so we're trying to make the most of it. We have a really wonderful sequence of programs available this fall, so I hope you'll come out and see them. I'm going to give you just a quick preview, but I want to let you know that you're sitting in the Sheridan Gallery right now, and you're among the works of our studio art faculty here at William & Mary. An amazing set of world-class talents who actually are the people who teach our art students, and those majoring in art, those minoring in art, those who just want to take an art course or two. And so I invite you, if you haven't come in to see this exhibition, to come back and spend some time with us because it really is wonderful. Well, we have a number of special programs coming this fall. There are some workshops for both adults and youth. The Art of the Book, October 22nd and 23rd. I think that's at Swem Library. We have a plein air oil pastel drawing program. And then for the young people, Imaginary Beasts and Stranger Things and the Tiny Art Museum. So please tell your friends about these programs. Please consider coming to one of them yourself. They're all going to be led by our Director of Engagement and artist here at the Muscarelle, Steve Prince, and many of you know him. We also are thrilled to have Liz Moran coming over to talk about some of the scholarship that she has embarked upon in her own professional career. She's going to be speaking on November 11th, Marking Time and Space, Sacred Landscapes in Afro-Caribbean Art. And then two special events, Music in the Galleries. You may not know this, but we have the gallery players in residence here and using this space for their classroom every Wednesday night since we returned to campus in the early stages of pandemic. And so we've loved having Susan Villa and her groups here. It's always the staff's favorite night to work late because we hear wonderful classical music coursing through our office suites. So we're not dashing out too early on Wednesday nights. But they'll be here on November 9th with a wonderful program. And then also our great friends at the Middle Eastern Music Ensemble will be here on November 17th. This room, for those of you who have not come to Music in the Galleries, this room, while not the ideal dimensions or shape for an art gallery, is remarkably well acoustically tuned. So we have beautiful music that comes out of this gallery. But what you're here for tonight is the kickoff presentation for our Fall Muscarelle Exploration Series. And this fall, we'll be doing a deep dive into the market for art. And we have a number of programs. We have 4 lectures, we have a film, and we're going to have a book discussion as well. I'll get to our speaker for tonight in just a minute, but I want to run through the rest of the calendar, and I invite you to take home our trifold on Muscarelle Explorations for the fall. It lists out all the programs, the times, and the place, and all of the places are actually here at the museum. So we'll be screening the film next week, The Price of Everything, here in the Sheridan Gallery. That talks about the market for art, how art gets priced, and who the drivers are as that pricing takes place. And then on October 25th, we're going to have Najee Dorsey come and speak about his efforts to bolster and establish and reestablish and affirm and reconfirm the African American art production here in the United States. And he'll talk about how he has worked to develop and broaden and expand the market for black artists here in America. He's the CEO and co-founder of Black Art in America. On November 3rd, we're going to have Lou Salerno speaking. We wanted to have a gallery perspective from New York, and Lou is the founder and CEO of Quest Royal Fine Art. Some of you may know that gallery. They're one of the preeminent dealers in American art in New York and around the world. And so he'll be here on November 3rd. And there's also going to be a discussion panel with him for students earlier that afternoon. And then on November 15th, Samantha Koslow will be joining us. She's the Director of Business Development and the Head of Museum Services at Christie's, and she's going to explain a bit about how the auction market works. And she also will be doing a panel with students. I think that one is being coordinated in conjunction with the Cohen Career Center. So for students in the audience who are interested in maybe learning a little bit more about the New York gallery scene and also about the auction market and how it works both in New York and internationally, stay tuned, and please look at what's happening at the Cohen Career Center and also here at the Muscarelle. On November 19th, we have one of our great friends, Elaine Ruffalo. She's our guest speaker from afar, very good friend of the Muscarelle, an amazing speaker. I know many of you love her. She's going to be delving into how the art market existed in the times of the Renaissance. She's a well-known art historian, and she's going to talk about that interface between patrons and artists in the Renaissance. And then my good friend Gary Ryan is going to join me in a virtual book discussion, but we're going to be co-moderating that discussion on December 8th, and we're going to be reading The Value of Art, Money, Power, and Beauty. So join us for that presentation as well. But let's get to tonight. Our speaker, Joe French, is a longtime friend of William and Mary, the Muscarelle Museum of Art, and me personally. Joe graduated from Southern Illinois University with a degree in psychology, but that wasn't really the path he was going to take. As many of us do as we come out of college, we begin to think, what are we really meant to be in this world? And Joe was also facing that question, and he began to explore around. And he soon became enthralled with photography. He had been engaged with photography even before that, but he really got more deeply attached to the medium. He learned the craft. He got better at it, but he soon wanted to be much more involved. And he eventually became a dealer in fine art photography and ultimately a collector. And in 2020, Joe donated a collection of photographs to the Muscarelle, and with his help, our collection of photography now includes close to 1,000 individual works by some of the most important photographers of all time. So I hope you will join me in welcoming Mr. Joe French. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, David, for that, breaking the place already, for that warm welcome. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about my experience in the world of photography as a fine art. I was lucky enough to be part of the Renaissance of photography as an art between 1972 and 1980. It was an exciting time with great artists of the time finally receiving the financial success that they were due. Museums woke up to the fact that they were missing important art forms in their collection. A whole new group of collectors discovered this form of art. I saw this as an opportunity to get on the ground floor. Even though the art form was older than Impressionism, it had not had the day in the sun. Sotheby's held their first photographic auction in 1972. After graduating from college, I received a 35mm camera, an SLR camera, as a graduation gift. At the same time, my friend Beth and her mother, Carol Ruth, decided they were going to start a photographic workshop. I went there to learn how to use my camera, and after a while, even taught basic photography classes. It was a time when you could get well-known photographers to come and do a workshop, which we would attend. Below is a sample of the artists that came to the workshop. This picture, Running Deer, was the first photograph that I ever bought. He was actually photographing there to actually, I covered up this little thing. There we go. No? Come on. Oh, there we go. He was at Stonehenge making these photographs when this herd white deer ran across the field. And he was using a 4x5 camera, and he was able to catch that picture. This, come on. Oh, no? There we go. Catch this herd. And it was something that was quite stunning, and that was the first picture I bought. Paul Caponigro was at the workshop and worked at the workshop. Paul studied with Minor White. He received 2 Guggenheim Fellowships and published 8 books. Paul was a dedicated pianist and considered music to be essential to his photographic work. Paul spent a lot of time at the workshop. He would let us print with him. He was working on a new body of work called Reading Woods series, and we were able to participate in that. Then we had George Tice, who was also one of the photographers that came and worked with. He worked with Lee Wittgen and opened the first photography gallery in the country. This was 1970. And he was also, I did extensive knowledge because of his extensive knowledge in photography. Tice had published numerous books, had numerous gallery exhibits, won several prestigious awards. This was another photographer that spent time at the workshop. We also got to watch how he developed his work. And this was, there we go. And this is called Aquatic Plants, was part of a portfolio series that he did. Their next artist was Lillian DeCock, was one of Ansel Adams' assistants, where she honed her own photography skills. As you can clearly see the influence of Ansel Adams with the richness and the sharpness of the print. She later married Doug Morgan, Barbara Morgan's son, at Ansel Adams' home. Barbara Morgan was a great photographer in her own right. Barbara Morgan was a photographer of modern dance. But Barbara Morgan was married to Doug Morgan, Willard Morgan, who was a publisher of photography books. Actually, Willard published Ansel Adams' first book on the zone theory. He also published Edward Weston, and this is Edward Weston with his 8x10 camera, and we'll have a little bit of discussion on the importance of that camera. And Edward Weston, this photograph here was, one day I got a call from Barbara, and it was actually, she says, guess what I found that's been behind this cabinet for 20 years? And that was this photograph. And this photograph was, you may or may not realize, but Edward Weston is probably, his photographs are one of the most sought-after photographs in the country, maybe in the world. And there it was, hidden behind this cabinet for 20 years. And of course, I had to buy it. One day, all of the artists are in the Muscarelle Museum. Beth and Carol Ruth and I got the opportunity to go to Ansel Adams' workshop in Yosemite. It was an incredible trip. As we were there in the spring as the park was coming alive. If you've never been to Yosemite, you should put it on your list of places you must see. We arrived in it with our large format cameras, similar to the ones a little smaller than the one I showed with Edward Weston, and settled in the lodge and met our instructors. Our instructors were master photographers, and it was a great honor to spend a week with them. One of the master photographers was an instructor, Wynn Bullock. Before he became a photographer, at the age of 42, he was a concert tenor, touring all over Europe, and his work can be found in over 90 museums. And he received national attention in 1950 when Edward Steichen added his work to the Family of Man, exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art and the Corrigan Gallery in Washington, D.C. This was a big deal. These two museums actually became a couple of the leading museums in the photography world. This great honor for Bullock to be included in this photography exhibit. He then met Edward Weston, who totally changed Bullock's style of photography. He switched from solarized prints for using the to the F64 philosophy, which I will discuss next. And Imogene Cunningham was a member of this F64 group, along with Edward Weston and Ansel Adams and Weston's son Brett, just to name a few. The F64 announced in 1932 that their style would be to promote sharp images, moving away from the pictorialism. Pictorialism was this style to imitate paintings. And this was the style of early photography because that's what they wanted to do. The F64 refers to the smallest style on a large format camera. It allows the sharpest image with the most depth of field, which is more than the human eye can achieve. This created a rivalry between the West Coast photographers and the East Coast style of pictorialism, similar to today's rivalry between the East Coast and West Coast hip-hop artists, but though no one got shot. Judy Dater was another of our instructors who taught our workshop. One of the most famous images, there it is. It's out of order. Imogene was this picture. That's Imogene Cunningham and Twinka. What our assignment that day was to go out into the woods with our 4x5 cameras and photograph nature. What we soon realized was that our goal was not to photograph nature, but the models that were in the woods. This is the 70s, and nudity was not a big deal, so we did not pay a lot of attention to the models. The next was the last photographer in that group was Jack Wellpot. He was a photographer who could be found in 17 museums, including the Muscarelle Museum. He was married at the time to Judy Dater. Next, I'm going to show you, this is Ansel Adams' Moonrise over Hernandez. I want you to remember this. And then this is an Ansel Adams picture at Yosemite. We'll talk about this later. The great takeaway from this trip was learning the zone theory. Ansel Adams accomplished something that not many photographers had done. By making sure the subject is within 7 zones on your light meter, you will be able to have detail in the white and the blacks. Next time you see one of Ansel Adams' prints, take a close look at the black and whites, and you too will see the detail he has captured. In the evening, we would gather at Ansel Adams' home, listening as he played the piano. This theme keeps coming over and over as these artists also seem to be involved in music. We talked about photos we had taken, critiquing them while drinking wine and smoking pot, but I did not inhale. It was the beginning of a friendship that lasted for years. It was an opportunity to acquire prints from all the instructors, which of course I did. Everyone's print cost $100, but Ansel Adams' prints were $250. Of course, I asked him how he was able to sleep at night, charging so much money. Little did I realize it turned out to be one of my better investments I ever made. By the time I owned a fairly good-sized photography collection, which at any opportunity I would show to my friends. Soon people started to ask me where could they get a print or two. Then I had to show them. Next thing I knew, I was selling other artists' photographs. No one was asking about acquiring my photos, so I reached out to the artists and started having photography shows at the workshop, and eventually I opened a gallery in Soho in an old warehouse building. Now you need inventory to fill the walls and the bins. Your choice was to buy it, have an artist provide it on assignment, or have collectors consign prints, and the last source was an auction, of course. I used all 4. One day I was sitting in the gallery and the phone rings. It was one of my friends calling. He says, "You won't believe whose number I found." Of course I had asked whose number. He said, while he was looking in the Manhattan telephone book, don't ask me why, and saw Berenice Abbott's phone number. It was a main number, but somehow it was listed in the Manhattan phone book. I know there are people in this audience that don't even know what a phone book is. In the olden days, books were published with people's phone numbers in them, and you could look up someone's number in those large books, also known as the white pages. I called Bernice, and she said, "Come on up to Maine." I had a friend who had a pilot's license, so we rented a Cessna 150 and flew to Bangor, Maine, and rented a car to drive to Abbottville, Maine. She was not related to the town. In fact, they spell it with 1 B, and she has 2 B's in her name. While we were driving up the back roads of Maine, we were suddenly passed by this car. And we arrived at her home 15 minutes later. But sure enough, sitting in Ms. Abbott's driveway was the car that passed us. Bernice was, at this time, 82 years old. She told us that she was going to live to 100 and acted like a much younger person, the fact that she drove much faster than I, and I'm a fast driver. Just for the record, she did not make it to 100, but she did get close. We had tea and looked at the photographs all afternoon. I bought several cases of photographs and paid her in cash, as she told me on the phone to bring cash as she doesn't accept checks. She did tell me she told me that she went across the border into Canada and bought Canadian maple leaf gold coins. I do not know if she was reporting it to the IRS, but it wasn't any of my business. We drove back to the airport, flew home. The next day I drove down to Wall Street in New York City, and after the stock market closed, I sold the photos to bankers in their conference room. We carried on this arrangement until the art market crashed in 1980 with the change in tax laws. This picture, this picture of New York at night is Berenice Abbott's signature image. This image was reproduced in many publications, and one of them was my daughter's textbook. My daughter, of course, told the teacher that she had to have this photo, that she had this photo hanging in her living room. The teacher said, "Of course, you mean you have a reproduction." So the next day, I had to take the print off the wall and took it to school so to prove her point. Another artist that I would buy prints from was Brett Weston. Ansel Adams introduced me to Brett on one of my trips to visit Adams in his Carmel home. Brett was a very charming person and considered himself a ladies' man. I soon learned that if I was interested in buying photos from him, I needed to be accompanied by an attractive woman. Quickly after we arrived, he would engage the young woman in conversation, and he would say, "Hey, why don't you go look in my vault and pick anything you want?" I was quite happy with that arrangement. His house was really something. He had recently built a house with two unusual qualities. He'd built a safe for his photographs that was pretty much looked like a bank vault and contained steel doors and sprinklers inside. The other unusual trait was the house was on a cliff that had a pool with a glass wall, which allowed you to look over the valley while you were swimming. It also had a platform so he could take pictures of people swimming in the pool. Brett did a series of photos of swimmers in the pool. He was a man in his 60s, not yet ready to accept his age. He did share wonderful stories about his father, Edward Weston. This is Glen Canyon, was one of his earlier photos. In this photo, you can see the influence of the F-64 group and see Brett was following in his father's footsteps. Another great artist that I spent time with was Elliott Porter, the father of color photography, an avid nature photographer. He helped to pioneer technologies of color, printing, and fought to have color photography recognized as an art. Color photography was not very stable process until very recently. Most of the early color prints faded over time. The only process that was stable was dye transfers, which was what Porter used for his photographs. This process could not be automated, and it was labor intense. It was a full color photographic printing process that was popular between the 1920s and the 50s. In those prints, 3 layers of dye, cyan, magenta, and yellow, are applied by hand to the one emulsion layer. The process involves many steps and painstaking alignment of each dye layer. As a result, dye transfers are rare and were seldom made by amateurs, and they were very, very stable when executed properly. They allowed the photographer exceptional control over the color balance. The process was supported by ad agencies, and when they went digital, Kodak stopped making the film. There were insufficient users to make it worth continuing to produce the film. Red Bud, the picture you're looking at now, is Porter's signature photo. This photo was featured in the Museum of Modern Art exhibit that Porter had. A man by the name of John Wozniak walked into my gallery one day with a case of dye transfer photographs. They were spectacular. The colors were brilliant and incredibly sharp. I later saw outtakes where John saw beauty and others saw junk. Like many of the photographers, he started out doing something else first. He went to MIT, was in graduate school getting his PhD, and his advisor was a man, Dr. Bose. Dr. Bose asked John, "Are you interested in working with him to start a speaker company?" So John left school and started the speaker company with Dr. Bose. He developed an interest in photography. He chose to use a 4x5 camera like Porter. And he also decided to, because he was using 4x5 camera, it was very similar to the F-64 group. But the twist was because He was an engineer. He solved the problem of consistently being able to create very sharp images. Not only did he print his own work, but he also printed some limited editions of Porter's work. After I introduced it to Porter lived in Santa Fe and had an adobe building which he housed his whole collection of 4x5 chromes. John and I spent days looking at the chromes. We took 30 chromes home, picked 10 to print a limited edition portfolio of 50 prints. I now have to discuss another great photographer. Unfortunately, I never met him. He died in '52. I am old, but not that old. His name is Edward Curtis. He created the greatest collection of photographs and texts documenting the tradition and cultures of Native America. It's an amazing body of work. The North American Indian he worked on for 27 years, from 1907 to 1930, and consisted of 2,200 photographs and over 5,000 pages of text. He traveled the continent photographing more than 70 Native American tribes. He was looking to photograph the tribes the way they were before they had any contact with white people. After a while, the Native Americans started requesting Curtis to come to their tribes to record their oral history and be preserved along with the pictures. Curtis was an amazing man. He dropped out of school when he was in 6th grade, built his own camera with the lenses that his father brought home from the Civil War. At the age of 14, he was already a great outdoorsman. He had learned to live off the land. At 14, he had to support his family, as his father never recovered from his injuries in the Civil War in 1885. In 1885, at the age of 17, he became an apprentice photographer. 2 years later, he bought a photography studio for $150. At this point, he was already making his name for himself as a photographer of Native Americans. This is one of his first photographs. One day, he was out climbing Mount Rainier when he rescued a group of prominent scientists who would change his life forever. One of the scientists was George Bird Grinnell, a naturalist and the founder of the Audubon Society, and a friend of Teddy Roosevelt. Grinnell shared the same passion for preserving the Native American culture as Curtis, and Grinnell was instrumental in helping to start Curtis on his way to accomplish his goal of documenting the Native American culture through photographs. With some financial support from J.P. Morgan, he set off on his 27-year goal to produce the collection by selling sets at a price of $3,000 to friends of Morgan, Grinnell, and Roosevelt. Many of the buyers were unable to pay when the project was completed in 1930 due to the Depression. He died broke, and Morgan owned the prints since he loaned Curtis $75,000 to complete the project, and Curtis was unable to pay him back the debt. Over the time, Curtis' photos were forgotten until his work came back to the world stage in 1970. Roughly 280 sets were believed to be completed. A set including 20 books with a total of 1,500 photogravures, and 20 portfolios, which included 700 photogravures. A photogravure was a printing process in which the image was put into a copper plate, and that was then printed on one of 3 types of paper: Van Gelder, Japanese vellum, and tissue. The Morgan estate sold 19 completed sets along with the copper printing plates, glass negatives, and unbound loose pages to Charles Laurent, a bookseller out of Boston, Massachusetts, for $1,000. With the unbound loose pages, Laurent completed some additional sets. The rest laid in the basement of the bookseller for 40 years. Once again, in 1970, the Philadelphia Museum of Art had an exhibit of Curtis's photographs. It rekindled people's interest in Edward Curtis's work. It had been almost 50 years since there had been a Curtis exhibit. The bookseller realized that he had a very valuable collection in his basement. I contacted the bookseller and bought a set of their recently discovered books from them for $20,000. A complete set of books sold recently for $950,000. At the time, the value was removing the photogravures from the book and selling the individual prints, which allowed people to own a little part of this great artist's collection. Even to this day, I go into homes and find 1 or 2 prints hanging on the wall. The following year, I traveled to Muskogee, Oklahoma. And actually, that had spent a summer there. That's another story that I'll have to tell you another day. But I went to the Bacone College in Muskego, Oklahoma, was a Native American college. I found a complete set of Curtis North American Indians. The students were using the set as a reference tool, and I found pencil marks on various pages. School was badly in need of money, so I was able to buy the set at market value, which at the time was $100,000. If you were to take it to today's value, that would be about $500,000 of spending power. However, I wanted the school to still have the reference tool, so I was able to replace the school set with a Johnson reprint, which had been created for the sole purpose to provide libraries the set as a reference tool. I was lucky to own 3 complete sets. I sold one as a complete set, but as stated previously, at the time they were worth more broken up. And I recently, a completed set sold for $2.9 million. I acquired my sets between $80,000 and $100,000. Most of the sets were broken up and sold in pieces. It was a quick way to get inventory, as there were over 2,200 prints to be found in the set. I have always found this photograph to be very moving. If you did not get it from the photograph, the title is The Vanishing Race. That told the story, which very much told the story of the time. I could go on for hours talking about Curtis and his journey, which was quite challenging and only succeeded because he was so committed to actually getting it done. It cost him his marriage, his source of income, the photo studio. While in court was settling the divorce, he had before his wife was awarded the studio, he had his assistant produce as many gold tones, a unique photographic process that Curtis created, and as they could, and then destroy the glass negatives, and so they could never be reproduced. And now I want to talk about auction house. Auction houses at this time offered the public view of the explosion of the photography fine art market. Every auction season, new records were broken. The auctions were amazing because you got to meet many of the photographers who came to the event. One such famous photographer who was at most of the auctions was Robert Mapplethorpe. He would be with his partner, patron, and dealer, Sam Wagstaff. Sam was instrumental in getting photography recognition as a fine art in modern times. Famous people like Elton John and David Crosby and many others were accumulating large collections of photographs. The International Center for Photography was at its pinnacle. Their galas were chaired by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. It was a place to be seen. I represented Berenice Abbott, and one of the year, the International Center for Photography honored Berenice. I walked into the gala at the World Trade Building. The venue was at the top of the world. Well, obviously that's not there anymore. Berenice was surrounded by Mrs. Kennedy, the chairman of Lehman Brothers, who was a big collector, the president of Payne Weber, Christie Brinkley, Cheryl Tiggs, and this is just a few of the famous people present. Berenice turned around and yells, "Joe, come over and meet some of my new friends." It was a moment in my life I will never forget. One of the men at the gala was instrumental in developing the international market of fine art photography. His name was Harry Lunn, an ex-CIA agent. He collected prints when he was in the CIA, and when his cover was blown, he retired and became a real estate broker. He then opened a print gallery, not a photo gallery, but a print gallery, and upon visiting New York in 1970, he happened to see an Ansel Adams moonrise over Hernandez. He went back to DC, that print that I showed you earlier is the print that he bought, and he went back to his DC gallery and arranged an Ansel Adams exhibit in which he sold $10,000 worth of prints, but at $150 a print. Over 66 prints he sold, and one show. And as mentioned earlier, the only gallery developed to photographs in the country at the time was Lee Wittgen in Manhattan. Lunn was rumored to have convinced Ansel Adams to announce that he would stop selling any photographs after 1975. This allowed Ansel Adams to become wealthy by raising the price as he got closer to the end date. Harry, of course, bought 1,000 prints. He once told me that late night over drinks that he had bought 820 moonrises for $300 each. The price for moonrise quickly rose to $20,000. Today, they sell in the range of $50,000 each. He paid $300,000 for the photos and sold them at $20,000 with a gross profit of $16 million. In today's dollars, that's equal to $80 million. He then created similar markets with other photographers such as Walker Evans, Robert Frank, Diane Arbus, Hein Kuhn. Lund controlled the market, he limited the supply, and made sure that photographs achieved high prices at auction. This caused the whole photography market to raise to new levels. As you know from your economic classes, prices go up, and that must also come down at some point. This was true of the art market. There was a change in the tax laws in 1980 which prohibited one from putting art in your retirement fund. It was time for me to make a decision. I was getting married, and the plan was to have children right away. I needed to decide what direction I was going to take in the future. My future wife did not consider the selling of art a reliable way to support a family. I'm not sure that I agree with it, but you know, a happy wife is a happy life. So shortly after I got engaged, a childhood friend stopped by the gallery and made a sizable purchase of photographs. As I was helping him load the art into his new BMW, I asked Scott, what are you doing that's changed his financial situation so radically? He did not say plastic, but he did say real estate. The last time I saw Scott, he was driving a very used Volkswagen, selling vacuum cleaners door to door. Now he was inviting me to his ski house in Vermont. And after doing some investigation, I closed the gallery and went to work for Scott. I went back to school and got a degree in real estate from NYU, and one of the 3 colleges at the time that offered a degree in real estate. The best part, I did not have to sell my babies anymore. I bought a brownstone in the city with 12-foot ceilings and where I could hang my collection and enjoy the art. I then decided I needed more wall space, and we moved to Bronxville to a 14-room house, and we had revolving shows changing the art on the wall on a regular basis. Recently, the time came to move into something smaller. But what am I going to do with my collection? I decided I did not like the idea of breaking it up, and I needed to find a place for it to live, where I could come visit periodically. There was only one answer: the Muscarelle Museum. Here are my tips on collecting. Art should not be bought as an investment, but something that speaks to you and brings you joy. The provenance and condition distinguishes the value between 2 prints of the same image. Investing in art for possible profit is tricky. Remember those 2 Ansel Adams that I showed you? The Moonrise was one of thousands of prints around the world. The other print is the only one. Curry Company ran Yosemite, concessions from 1925 to 1993. The Curry Company commissioned Ansel Adams to photograph the park as part of their attempt to bring the 1932 Winter Olympics to Yosemite. The Curry Company chose 70 prints for Ansel Adams, and then Ansel Adams' home burned to the ground, destroying the negatives and any other prints. This is one of those 70 prints, but the market thinks it's worth 1/10 of the Moonrise. The market is unpredictable and illogical, and the moral of the story is one should buy what they like, not what they think is going to appreciate the most. Auctions are fun, but know your limits before bidding. And pick a genre that's such as pictorialism period or the young artist, something that you enjoy. Remember, before 1970, there was not a gallery in the U.S. that exclusively sold photographs of fine art. There are still, in my opinion, plenty of important pieces that can be purchased without spending tens of thousands of dollars. It has been fun talking about the renaissance of fine art photography, and thank you for giving me the time to talk about what I enjoy.